this last lecture today, means we have ultimately come towards the end of this course on internet technology. Today we shall basically not be talking about anything new, rather we would like to summarize whatever had been covered so far in this course, and that way we will be concluding this particular course on internet technology. But before that, let us first look at the answers to the questions that were posed in our last lecture. We start like this. The first question was, what are the basic functions of web crawler? Well, web crawler, as we had said, it is a software tool which navigates the web automatically on demand. It creates the index database and provides query processing facilities. These are the main tasks of the web crawler. What are the key design goals of web crawler? The key design goals were content based indexing, indexing based on whatever is there as part of the document in the content, not just the name of the file or the keywords. Okay. And crawler behavior, we had mentioned it, that web crawler uses a modified version of breadth first search to create the index. How is the index generation problem mapped into a graph problem? Well, here we had said that the whole web is viewed as a graph, a huge directed graph with the documents as the vertices and hyperlinks as edges with directions, directed edges. Does web crawler retrieves every file being pointed to for the purpose of indexing? Well, they do not retrieve all files. There is no point in retrieving files like image, audio, video, etc., which do not point to any other documents, or content wise they do not provide any additional useful information. So that is why web crawler need not retrieve these kind of files which may not provide any additional information to it from the point of view of indexing. How does web crawler function in the indexing mode? Well, in the indexing mode, web crawler carries out a modified version of breadth first search on the web graph. It also ensures that every server has a representative document that has been indexed. So at least one document from every server is included in the index. What is real-time search? Well, in real-time search, given a user's query, web crawler tries to find the document that most closely matches. Well, here this is a combination of database search and also a modified version of crawling to get information about documents which are not yet been indexed. So now let us come to the course modules that we have already covered and the lectures. So here we would try to look at an overview that what we had seen so far in the last 39 lectures. So let us go through this journey and try to find out what are the things that we had covered. The first module was introduction. In the first lecture, which was titled Introduction to Internet, these were the topics that were covered. Define the internet, explain how the internet has evolved, identify the distinguishing characteristics of the internet, why it is different from yet another network, summarize the popular internet applications, identify the internet resource and documents, RFC documents. So here I repeat, these RFC documents carry a great wealth of information. So if you want to know more about a particular protocol or technology, just search for RFC documents. They are the authentic source of all details that is pertaining to a particular protocol or technology. And finally, identify the topics that will be covered in the present course. This was the coverage in the first lecture. Now, in the second lecture, we reviewed the network technologies that would be required for the remainder of the course. So, some basic networking concepts like distinguish between a LAN and a WAN, explain the differences between circuit switching and packet switching, differences between virtual circuits and datagram packet switching, the 7-layer OSI model, distinction between the workings of hub, switch and router, and illustration of the typical architecture of an organizational LAN. So, this lecture basically was meant to give you an overview of the kind of networking concepts and terminologies that we will be using subsequently, so that even if someone of you do not have a proper background in networking, you can really pick up your knowledge and understand the lectures that will follow. In the second module, which was on transmission control protocol and internet protocol, TCP/IP, in the third lecture, TCP/IP part 1, we basically talked about the TCP/IP protocol stack, how the TCP/IP protocol stack functions. We started with the transport layer protocol basic functionalities, the basic functionalities of TCP and UDP, then the basic functionalities of the network layer protocol IP, and we looked into some detail about the IP packets. In particular, we looked at the different header fields in IP packets and why they are used, what are the different functions. In the fourth lecture, TCP/IP part 2, here we proceeded with our discussion on IP packets. We first talked about fragmentation, how IP packets are fragmented and what are the fields in the IP headers that are used in the process of fragmentation. We had mentioned that IP uses non-transparent fragmentation in the sense that it is the responsibility of the final destination to put together all the small pieces of fragments together to generate or recreate the original packet. So, here we discussed the differences between transparent and non-transparent fragmentation. We identified the IP header fields which are used in fragmentation of the packets and subsequent reassembly, and we illustrated through an example how a data packet gets fragmented in the IP protocol. Lastly, we looked at the IP address classes and their basic capacities and sizes. In the next lecture, TCP/IP part 3, we continued our discussion by looking at the transport layer protocols this time. So, we started with the definition of port numbers and associations, which are essential to identify the communicating entities at the transport layer level. Okay. So, we discussed what are the main differences in TCP and UDP, in the way they function, in the way they are different in terms of their capabilities, and we also looked at the headers of TCP and UDP packets, what are the various headers and why are they used. In the third module, we used the concepts of this TCP/IP addressing, whatever we discussed before, to talk about addressing and routing, which are very essential in internet. So, the first lecture under this module, lecture 6, was on IP subnetting and addressing. So, here we basically started by talking about the basic concepts of IP subnets and subnet masks. We had also mentioned that as an alternative to using subnets, we can also use multiple address classes. So, what are the relative benefits? Why to use subnets and not multiple address classes? This is what we had discussed. And to provide more flexibility, how the concept of variable length subnet mask or VLSM can be used to achieve much better utilization of the available IP address space, that was also discussed. Then finally, we talked about the present day trend, how the so called classful addressing, where the address classes are significant, that is slowly disappearing, and we are going towards something called classless internet domain routing or CIDR. This was also discussed. In lecture 7, we started our discussion on internet routing protocols, part 1. So, here we started with an explanation how an IP router works, how routing is carried out. We looked at the various fields in a typical routing table and what are the kinds of decisions a router has to take based on the entries in a routing table. Well, understanding the concept of autonomous system is essential here. So, we talked about an autonomous system, what it is, and we started our discussion on the internal routing protocols. We talked about RIP and OSPF and how they can dynamically update the routing tables of the routers inside a particular autonomous system. Now, recall the internet or the internal routing protocols, they are usable to routers which are inside an autonomous system. Okay. So, this RIP and OSPF, these are protocols which are used for that purpose. Now, in internet routing protocol part 2, we extended our discussion to the external routing protocols, which means routers across more than one autonomous systems. So, the routers which are located in different places in different autonomous systems, they can exchange messages and keep their routing tables updated. If someone discovers a better route to a particular destination, it can inform the other routers in the autonomous systems to make the necessary updations in the table. So, the most common protocol in this category are the border gateway protocol or the BGP. This was discussed here, and we also talked about the IP next generation or IP version 6. What are the major modifications and capabilities, and we had also mentioned that why we have not already moved on to IPv6. What are the problems that are still preventing us to migrate from the so called IP version 4 to IP version 6. Well, although some of the isolated companies and organizations and institutions, they have migrated, but that is still on an experimental level. Okay. Still it will take some time for us to move on to IPv6 in a very coordinated way. Now, in module 4, we talked about common internet applications. We started with a discussion on client server concepts, domain name system, telnet, FTP. Since all the internet applications that we see, they are based on client server concepts, so we started our discussion with a basic understanding of how the client server concept works. Then we explained with illustrations how DNS servers work and how they can be used to translate a domain name into an IP address and vice versa. So, the name resolution process, how DNS servers can do that, this was explained. Then we talked about the telnet and FTP protocol with some demonstration usages. So, telnet and FTP protocol, we had said that these were perhaps the first protocols to be used and they are still very useful. In the next lecture, lecture 10, we talked about electronic mail. Well, here we looked at the overall architecture of the email system. So, we saw that what are the different components, how emails flow from a client to a destination. What are the basic functionalities of the two main protocols that are used in email, simple mail transfer protocol SMTP and multipurpose internet mail extension MIME. Some sort of an example demonstration that how a mail can be sent using raw SMTP commands. We had seen that just by connecting a mail server over port number 25 and by directly giving the SMTP commands, it is possible to send a mail from any host which has a connection to that SMTP server. Okay. and we had some discussion regarding the email header fields and how on the receiver side you can use POP3 or IMAP to extract or read your mails from a mail server. Now, in lecture 11 we started a discussion on World Wide Web part 1. So, here we first explained the basic functionalities of the web clients, which are the browsers, and the web servers. We talked about the Hypertext Transfer Protocol HTTP, which is the language using which the web clients and servers communicate among themselves. So, we talked about the different commands and responses that are possible under HTTP. We talked about Uniform Resource Locator URL. So, what are the different kinds of URLs you can use to locate different kinds of resources? And finally, we said that how a web server can be accessed from a web client. That means some the basic GET commands. First you have to connect to the server over a specified port number 80 is typical, and after that you will have to send a sequence of GET or POST requests, and you will be getting back some responses based on whatever you would send. Okay. So, the next lecture, lecture 12, we continued with the World Wide Web. So, here we talked about the design of a skeletal web server and how it can be used to respond to basic HTTP queries. We talked about proxy servers. We talked about network address translators, how these two, you can say, devices has become so very essential in modern day networks. And we had also looked in detail what are the different operational modes of a network address translator. So, depending on the requirement of your organization, you can configure a NAT or a network address translator in the way it suits you the best. So, in the next module, module 5, we talked about the creating or the creation of the web pages. So, here we started with discussion on HTML part 1. So, in the first lecture here we talked about the basic concepts of HTML tags and attributes. Here we had said that HTML is a markup language where the tags are all predefined. So, unlike XML where you can define your own tags, in HTML all the tags are predefined in the language. So, you will have to understand what are the tags that are available to you, and since they are predefined, all tags also have a specific meaning. So, you will have to understand what a tag really signifies, and suppose you are designing a browser yourself, you will have to interpret the tags accordingly and you will have to display the text in a suitable form depending on the semantic of the tag. So, here we explain the basic concepts of tags, and then we saw how an HTML document looks like, what are the different components of an HTML document. We saw various usages of the basic document structure, how we can give headings, layout tags, and some character formatting tags. These were something which we had discussed in the first lecture here, lecture 13. Now, in the next lecture, lecture 14, HTML part 2, here we started by talking about lists. Now, you can recall in HTML you can have various kinds of lists, ordered lists, unordered lists, description, you can also nest lists one inside the other. So, depending on how you want to format your document, how you want your document to look like, you can use nestings of these lists in whatever way you can to make your document look better and attractive. Then we talked about hyperlinks, how we can add hyperlinks to an HTML page, and how we can include images, inline images, and other documents, images, it can be audio, video, PDF file, anything, how we can include them within an HTML document. In the next lecture, lecture number 15, here again continuing with HTML, we first talked about how we can specify a table description. So, what are the tags and attributes that are available in HTML which can help us in specifying the structure of a table. So, we gave a number of examples here where various kinds of tables with varied degree of complexity was shown. How you can write that? You can have multiple columns, you can merge 2 or more columns, you can merge 2 and more rows. So, you can have whatever you want while you are basically composing the table. So, in whatever way you want to look, you can also have centered, left justified, right justified, all those things are possible. And we also talked about frames here. So, how you can use frames to make a web page look more attractive with several different sections in a page. You can interlink them using hyperlinks and so on. And of course, lastly we talked a little bit about cascaded style sheets or CSS. In lecture 16, we tried to give an overview of the extensible markup language XML, because XML is so very popular today. You may be knowing that there are so many various applications which use XML for the specification and also post processing. So, here we try to give you an overview of the basics of the HTML language regarding the structure of the of an XML document, the different types of document type declarations, and the basic concept of simple and extended links. See, here one thing we emphasize, that XML is a language which the user can define, because in XML nothing is predefined, there are no predefined tags. Depending on the context in which you want to use the language, see, XML need not only be used for the creation of web pages, you can use it to specify some kind of a timing diagram. You can specify, you can use it to specify, say for example, some molecular structures in chemistry. So, the whatever is your domain, XML is just a vehicle or a language using which you can provide a specification. But what will you do with the specification? There will be some application which will be running in the back end that will be taking your XML specification as input, and XML parsers are available which can parse the XML file to give the relevant information to your backend application, and the backend application can work on whatever you have specified. Okay. Okay. In the next module, we started our discussion on interactive web pages. So, here we said that web pages need not be residing statically on a web server. Depending on users' requests, some page may be created on the fly and can be sent back to the client. These are called dynamic or the dynamically generated web pages or interactive. So, first we talked about HTML forms, which are a basic means to provide this interactivity. So, firstly we looked at the HTML language. What are the various tags and attributes which are there that allow us to specify a form, to design a form, and we had given a number of examples to illustrate the so called form design, how we can design the forms. Then we had illustrated how a form interacts with a server side script. What is the basic mechanism? So, the form resides on the client side, a server side program resides on the server side. How do they interact among themselves? This is something which needs to be understood. This was explained here in this lecture. And finally, a complete form based design was shown which uses a server side script which was written in PERL. In the next lecture, lecture 18, we talked about image maps. Well, just image maps, just to recall, it is an image where different portions may point to different hyperlinks. You can click on the different portions of an image to go to several different documents or links. So, here we started with a basic understanding of the image maps. What are image maps? and how are they advantageous as compared to other technologies that are provided in HTML. There are two kinds of image maps we had said, server side or client side. So, firstly we had seen how a server side image map works, and then how a client side image map works. Then we looked at the relative merits and demerits. That means when to use client side image map, when to use server side image map. Today most people prefer to use client side image maps, but you have to understand what are the advantages there. Why do you want to use client side image maps? Okay, fine. In the next lecture, lecture 19, we talked about common gateway interface or CGI scripts. Now, here in the CGI script, we basically talked about the basic technology using which the client side forms and the server side scripts can interact among themselves. The server side script was traditionally named as CGI script, and this name is still continuing. Okay. So, here we looked at the basic structure of CGI scripts and how they work. What are the different ways in which form data can be passed to a CGI script? There are two methods, get and post. So, how the URLs are encoded and decoded when they are sent to the CGI script or the server, and how the CGI script can access the standard environment variables, so when they want to, and how the CGI script send back the responses back to the web client after they have finished whatever they are trying to do, because ultimately the CGI script is trying to do some processing on the server side. After the processing is done, the result of the processing has to be sent back to the client, properly formatted, typically in the form of an HTML file. So, this file is created on the fly depending on the result of the computation. Lecture 20, but some other technologies were discussed here. So, here we try to compare the other competing technologies that can be used to design interactive web pages instead of CGI. Well, there are other competing technologies like ASP, PHP, Java server pages, and there are many other such standard environments available. So, it is not necessary for you to learn each and every one. Whenever you require, and if you know any one of them, you can easily pick up the others. They are all quite similar in nature. So, here we talked about Java servlets, little bit about Java servlets and how they can be used to create interactive web pages, and also we talked about active server pages, ASP. Both of them can be used for the design of the so called interactive or dynamic web pages. Next, we moved on to the module number 7. So, here we talked about the language PERL. Now means I had mentioned earlier also, I am just also emphasizing now that PERL is a language which has wide applicability in a number of different areas. One of the areas is of course in the writing of server side scripts. PERL has a number of very powerful capabilities like string processing and string matching, which are required in a wide variety of applications. It is a very powerful scripting language. You can write automated scripts in PERL to do a number of different things, starting from very simple to very complex in an automated way. So, learning PERL is useful not only for internet applications, but for other applications as well. So, in the first part of the lecture, lecture 21, PERL part 1, here we first stated the main advantages of the language. We looked at simple PERL programs and how to run them, introduced the concept of scalar variables, how we can use them in assignments, and the concept of interpolation. Then we talked about array variables and how they can be used in typical programs. Now, in lecture number 22, here we continued with PERL. We started by introducing the file handling functions available in PERL, how they can be used. then the various control structures with examples, the relational operators, conditional statements, and all these features were illustrated through examples. This was what was discussed in lecture 22. Now, in lecture 23, we started by talking about the string matching functions in PERL, which are supposed to be very powerful. We introduced the concept of regular expression. This carries most of the power of the string manipulation feature in PERL. We illustrated how string substitution operators work. We illustrated them through examples, and interpretation of the special variables that are used in PERL, dollar and its various postfixes. In lecture 24, here we are continuing with PERL part 4. Here we talked about associative arrays, we talked about subroutines, local variables, and with all these things we explained the coding of complete CGI script programs using PERL. And we also had mentioned that other than PERL you can also write CGI scripts in other languages like C or other shell programming language like shell scripts, bone shell, cone shell, but PERL will give you certain distinct advantages that was mentioned, because PERL helps you in doing certain things much easier as compared to the other languages that are available. But there are some security issues in CGI scripts which are also discussed. I mean, if you are not careful, so a CGI script may lead to a security loophole in your system. So when you are designing a system with a CGI script in it, you should properly check that your CGI script, the way users are submitting the form data and the way they are processed, there are no loopholes in it. Fine. In the next module, we talked about a very important tool that is used in internet today, JavaScript. JavaScript essentially is considered to be an extension of the HTML language. JavaScript is not an independent language. It runs hand in hand with HTML, they are embedded inside HTML, and they are interpreted at the side of the client only. Server does not do any processing on JavaScript. So the whole HTML file along with JavaScript are downloaded on a client, and the browser executes the JavaScript code whatever are present there. So in the first lecture, lecture number 25 out here, JavaScript part 1. So we first talked about how JavaScript executes while embedded in HTML, and we also mentioned that Java and JavaScript are not the same, they are different. There are differences with Java. JavaScript is object oriented, so the concept of objects and methods in JavaScript were explained, and how a JavaScript code was run or can be run on the browser was explained, and some useful JavaScript codes were shown. In lecture 26, JavaScript part 2, we continued with illustrating JavaScript features through examples. We gave some examples for data validation, some simple animation examples, scrolling of texts, how to browse through the history, and so on. And we also showed that how you can include an external JavaScript file in an HTML document. So instead of being embedded inside HTML, you can have the JavaScript code in a separate file which can be linked. The advantage is that if several HTML files have the same set of JavaScript functions to be used, then it need to be written and stored only once. Okay. And also we have seen how we can use JavaScript URLs in scripts. In the next lecture, continuing with JavaScript, we first talked about cookies, how you can use cookies, and then we talked about interoperability with applets, how a Java applet can be called from a JavaScript program, and vice versa. Then we talked about the various object types which are supported by JavaScript and what are the methods and properties, because understanding of these features is important, because only then you will know that what are the facilities that the language JavaScript offers you. Okay? Well, you can change the color of a document, you can replace a document with another document, but you must know that which object you are modifying and which property of the object or attribute you are trying to change. Okay? So, all these things were discussed. So, in the next module we started our discussion on Java and the internet. Here we started our discussion on the language Java and how are they relevant in the internet scenario. So, in lecture number 28 we talked about Java applets part 1. So, here we first explained the main design goals of Java. We try to explain why Java is considered to be a language suitable for the internet. See, today some other competing languages have also come up, like C#, the .NET platform, which are considered to be platform independent and also suitable for internet. But Java was the language which emerged, you can say, the first in the category, which was supposed to be very suitable for applications in the internet. So, we talked about the basic concept of Java applet and how it is different from a standalone Java application. You may be knowing that this Java applet is the program which you can embed in an HTML document. So, we will have to understand the concept of an applet, how an applet can be written. So, we also showed how an applet can be embedded in an HTML document and how they can be executed. In the next lecture, Java applets part 2, we illustrated first that how a Java application can be converted to an applet, because it is quite possible that whatever you are trying to embed in HTML, that is already available in the form of a Java application. So, first you will have to convert it into an applet. Okay. So, this was illustrated. What are the different steps to be followed, what are the different rules you must use, and the so called applet life cycle. See, applet resides within the browser. So, what are the different states of an applet and how the states move from same is one to the other, and when the applet terminates, how it terminates, and so on. So, all these things were explained with examples. And then we showed how multiple applets can be embedded within the same HTML page and how they can interact among themselves, more complex applets. In lecture 30, we had seen some of the client server programming features in Java, and we found that it is really very easy to write or develop client server applications in Java. So, here we explained the process of writing client server application, how we can write the code here. We demonstrated writing of connection oriented servers, also connection-less servers, which uses TCP and UDP respectively, and also the corresponding client in Java and how they work. And lastly, we also had an example that how a Java applet can communicate with a server-side script. Now, in module 10, we started our discussion on a very important topic, internet security. Now, you know today that internet, due to its vast size and its openness, they have also become a place where unless you are careful, there can be some kind of a harm that can be bestowed on you. See, harm can be defined in two ways. One is related to the information you are trying to hide. Some of the information which are supposed to be confidential and hidden and stored somewhere, someone else can have access to those unclassified information. And the second thing is that, well, nowadays so many different kinds of applications are emerging on the internet, the e-commerce or the e-business are one of the most important and emerging applications. So, there we are transacting money on the internet, and very naturally that is one of the target of the hackers to try and break into. So, you must be extremely careful about the way you log into the systems when you are carrying out monetary transaction. Be sure to log off from the system when you finish the transaction and close the browser. No trace of the history should be maintained in your system, so that subsequently some the hacker or some of the other malicious scripts can try to dig out that information from your machine. Okay. So, in the first lecture in this module, lecture 31, we talked about intranet, extranet and firewall. What are the different kinds of firewall? So, we talked about intranets, extranets, what are their differences, what are the functionalities of the firewall, what are the various design alternatives that you may face when you are implementing a firewall, and illustration of a typical design of intranet or extranet. Lecture 32 concerned about the basic cryptographic concepts, first part of it, part 1. Here we first introduce the basic cryptographic terminologies that are used commonly. Then we identified the different security threats that we face in the internet. We talked about the so called symmetric or public key, private key, and the public key or the asymmetric cryptography techniques. And in this lecture we talked about also a practical symmetric key encryption decryption scheme. Now, we had mentioned under the symmetric key category, where both the sender and receiver are sharing the same key for encryption and decryption both, there are many commercially available algorithms. DES is an older version of the algorithm, but today advanced encryption standard or AES is considered to be the algorithm which is safe and can be used. Okay. Now, in lecture 33 we continued our discussion on cryptographic concepts. We first looked at how public key cryptographic schemes can be used for encryption, decryption and also authentication, and we looked at a practical public key cryptography scheme, that is the RSA. The RSA algorithm is the most widely used public key cryptographic scheme, almost universally used. Okay. So, we talked about how the RSA system works. We also looked at a practical message authentication scheme, and we gave an idea, we illustrated a scheme where a key can be exchanged by two parties over an insecure channel, namely the Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm that was also discussed. Now, in lecture 34 we actually looked at some of the cryptographic applications that are used on the internet. Well, the basic concepts of symmetric key cryptography, public key cryptography, authentication, all of them are combined together to create or formulate internet security applications. So, here in this lecture we talked about several such security applications. So, we first talked about the so called secure socket layer or SSL, this particular architecture and the protocol. Then we talked about the IPsec protocol to provide security at the IP layer level, and secure HTTP protocol, which is used quite widely nowadays for providing security at the web server level, at the web access level. So, in module 11 we looked at some miscellaneous application instead of concentrating on any particular topic or area. So, first in lecture 35 we talked about electronic commerce. Now, as you know, electronic commerce is gaining in popularity nowadays. Today, sitting anywhere you can carry out any kind of transaction. Well, even through your mobile phone, if you have GPRS capability, or even through SMS also, you can carry out a number of such transactions. For example, you can book a ticket through your mobile phone, even by sending an SMS. So, all these things are available today, and these are certainly some utilities which are of extreme, you can say, benefit to the users, but along with it comes the threats and the, you can say, the security worries. You must be very sure what you are doing, how you are doing, and what are the different possible attacks that might be taking place while you are carrying out the transaction. So, a good electronic commerce system should be able to safeguard against all these possibilities. Okay. So, we talked about electronic commerce, some of the issues which are involved in the process. So, we looked at the typical architecture of an e-commerce system. So, what are the main challenges and some of the electronic payment systems that are in use. So, I had mentioned that some of the electronic payment systems are very complex or proprietary. Some of the companies are using them, but they do not disclose it to the general public. So, one thing is to be understood, whatever is being used, it must be a very safe and secure method, which should be, well, which should be hacker proof, but hacker proof is a term which is not possible. Hackers are always one step ahead of what you are doing. Okay. Hackers are supposed to be a person who knows the ins and outs of your system and their loopholes. So, whatever you do today, tomorrow you can be sure that some hacker will find some loophole in your existing system and find some new way of attacking. So, when you are saying that I am building a secure system, it should be a continuous process. Building a secure system today may not mean that the system will remain secure tomorrow. You will have to update it continuously. Okay. So, in lecture 36, we talked about some very interesting or important applications which you see on the internet today, the so called streaming multimedia applications. So, here in this lecture we tried to talk about the basic requirements of multimedia networking, to understand how the different types of streaming multimedia applications work, and one standard protocol was discussed here, the real time streaming protocol, RTSP. So, here we emphasized that the standard network protocols like TCP/IP, they may not be suitable for delivering real time data to a destination which is playing the real time data continuously as it is receiving, because TCP/IP has unpredictable delay, packets may appear out of order. So, all these issues are there, but real time protocol, any protocol which wants to handle real time traffic must address these issues. Okay. So, this is what was discussed there, and in lecture 37 we talked about some specific application of real time protocol, the internet telephony and this RTP. So, here we talked about IP telephony to start with, then we analyzed the packet losses and jitters, why this packet losses take place, why jitters appear, and what are their impacts on the playback performances. Then we talked about the standard protocols RTP and the associated control protocol, real time control protocol, how an RTP packets look like, and why RTP is considered to be better than TCP for real time traffic. Because RTP takes care of a few things. RTP will not allow you to play a traffic which is to play a packet which is coming out of order. RTP also uses buffering to minimize jitters. If there is a variability in the packet delays, to minimize that, sometimes some buffering and delaying is done before the playback is started. So, all these things are taken care of by RTP at the application layer level. See, maybe in the internet of tomorrow, the low level protocol layers will directly support real time traffic, but unfortunately the internet that you have today, at the lower level, the network layer and the transport layer, there is no support, no direct support of real time traffic. So, whatever you can do best, you can do by having something at the application layer level. That is the approach which is mostly followed in these protocols. Now, in lecture 38, we talked about search engines and web crawlers, the first part of it. So, in lecture 38 we talked about the search engine, why it is used, how it works, what are the different types of search engines, and we had said that broadly there are two classes of search engines, one is crawler based and other is human powered. Well, both are important, but under what circumstances which one to use and which one not to use. So, these are something you need to look at or understand, and what are the design challenges of a search engines and how a search engine can automatically find keywords from a document. So, all these issues were discussed in this lecture. Now, in lecture 39, search engines web crawler, the part 2, the last part of it. So, here we explained the design goals of the web crawler, which is one of the commercially available tools which came up in the 90s, mid 90s, but it is still considered to be one of the very you can say important one in terms of its design principle. And we looked at what are the different design components of the web crawler in terms of its architecture and what are their functions. So, we also looked at some of the heuristics that are used by web crawler to discover new documents to be indexed, and we had said that web crawler works in two different modes. First is the indexing mode. Now, when the web crawler is actually trying to crawl through the web and create indexes of new documents it is discovering, and the real time search mode, where depending on the keyword the user is supplying, the web crawler will of course search his dictionary. In addition, it can also look for some other pages which it has not indexed so far. So, this phase also may need some searching or crawling through the web. Okay. This is the basic principle of web crawler. And of course, in this last lecture today we are talking about the course summary and conclusion. So, we have basically arrived at the end of this course on internet technology. See, internet technology, there are so many different things to talk about and discuss. So, based on my wisdom, I had selected certain topics and I had tried to convey some information on those topics to you, but this is not all. There are so many other things to look at and study. Deliberately, I am not giving you any particular references to study, because what I feel is that at least in this subject, giving you some reference will limit the domain beyond which you will not explore. Rather, you use this internet as a resource. You go to the internet, search for the resources, you see what new is going on, you look at the RFCs, you will get a huge wealth of information out there. Of course, many books are available, many very good books are also available. So, I deliberately would not like to give you any reference of those books. I would like you to find them out yourselves, explore the web. See, whatever I have tried to discuss in this course, you can treat this as some kind of a platform. So, that platform would be useful for you to explore and understanding some new materials that you find. Okay. I tried to give you some basic background. Suppose if you know means one language, it will be easier for you to pick up and learn a second language. So in a very similar way, so whatever the basic prerequisites I felt, I tried to cover in this course, and whatever else is left, that you can explore depending on your requirements, depending on your interest, depending on your needs. You can explore, you can find out, and you can get almost everything available on the net. So, with this I come to the end of this lecture. All the best wishes to you all. Thank you.
1951. A young nation aspiring to find ways to fulfill a dream lays the foundation of an institution that will give aspiring technocrats the license to fly high. The first Indian Institute of Technology is born at Kharagpur. Founded on the basis of the recommendations of the N.R. Sarkar Committee that was set up in 1945 to consider the development of higher technical institutions in India, the institute was first established in 5 Esplanade East, Kolkata, before it moved to Kharagpur in 1951. With Sir Gyan Chandra Ghosh as the first director and Dr. B.C. Roy as one of its founding guardians, the institute established itself as the symbol of a young, dynamic and resurgent nation. As top students rubbed shoulders with the most celebrated of professors and scholars, visions took shape. And IIT Kharagpur continued to play the pioneering role that was envisaged for it, enabling India to become a knowledge powerhouse that it is today. Indeed, in this Golden Jubilee year, as the celebration continues, Pandit Nehru would surely have been a proud man today. For him, IIT Kharagpur was always more than just an institute of technology. In his own immortal words, it is indeed a fine monument of modern India.